In December 2017, the National Assembly passed an act to establish the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Summer Commission. 11 members of the commission were sworn in October 2018.
In our first mission to the TRRC, we had gotten there as the commission was just being set up. There are statement takers, investigators, researchers, lawyers, all showing up. They'd recently been hired. Everyone is trying to figure out, how is the commission going to work?
The National Assembly mandated the commission to investigate and establish an impartial record of the nature, causes, and the extent of violations and abuses of human rights committed during the period July 1994 to January 2017.
What will we do? Will this be effective? Will the public pay attention? Will this be meaningful for the country?
In order to, quote, promote healing and reconciliation, respond to the needs of the victims, address impunity, and prevent repetition of the violations and abuses suffered by making recommendations.
Flash forward a year for our second mission, and I will always remember we came in from the airport. The first meal we had was in a restaurant, just a local place, and we sit down and the radio is on and they're listening to the public hearings that the TRRC is holding.
And up to now, it's almost a year of testimonies that we have had. And we have had well over 150 testimonies here, out of which a number of them were women. Precisely about 29% of the witnesses who testified are women.
And we very quickly discovered that all through the country, everyone was just completely riveted by what was taking place. So people are talking about it, they're posting about it on Facebook, they're streaming.
I would literally be standing over you as you consult with your client.
Dañuy taxaw tiimu la gannaaw boo xamee yaa ngi waxtaan ak sa client.
Salaamaaleykum Gambia, salaamaaleykum. Ñu leen koy waxee rek TRRC review la. Say bu nekk rek dina
KITA. Yeah, I'm going to explain TRRC how Monica video bini.
I later on came to know him.
Yeah, like come film do wahe about how this Sanabanjang numneke di def like come Gambians and all that.
And to see what had become of the Gambian TRRC so quickly and what it meant for people to really understand and learn collectively about what had happened under the Jammeh regime from 1994 to 2017 was just fascinating and a really exciting thing to be a part of.
This is the Justice Decoder podcast. I'm Olivier Clavet, your host for this series. And together we will dive into key thematic areas of international justice with experts from the Justice Rapid Response roster. Today with us is Eliot Bahar, a former Canadian Crown prosecutor, a war crimes prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and security counsel for Apple. He's done deployments and work on international justice projects in regions like West Africa, Iraq, Myanmar, Central America, and the Balkans. And he's been on the roster of Justice Rapid Response since 2018. Eliot, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Eliot, the first question I'd like to ask you is, why does someone decide to leave Toronto to go see the world and work for international tribunals and on issues such as war crimes, for instance? Were the winters this cold in Canada?
They were that cold, and a lot colder than the weather in the Gambia. But I started my career as a Crown prosecutor in Toronto, and I was a prosecutor for about 10 years in total. I was running trials, arguing appeals. I worked in a hate crimes unit. It was a great start to my career, really meaningful work, but I made the jump to international criminal law in 2008 when I joined the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, which is also a reasonably cold and windy place. But I spent most of my time there focused on single very large case about the ethnic cleansing of Kosovo. And following that, I shifted gears and went to work for Apple in California. And from that time forward, I've really spent my career both working for tech companies and also doing international deployments, as you mentioned, with going to West Africa, working with Yazidis in Iraq, in Myanmar, Central America. And I would say in the sort of latter part of my career, I've been again shifting gears, at least on the international side, to play more of an advisory role where I'm working with institutions in more of a sort of educational consulting capacity. And that's been great. It's been really meaningful, very gratifying work.
Elliot, today we'll try to focus on the work you've done with the Gambian national authorities as they were establishing the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, the TRRC. Could you please tell us a bit about your first deployment in the country in 2018, and especially about the peer-to-peer techniques that you relied on to train local teams?
So the Gambian TRRC was set up in 2017, 2018. Its mandate was to focus on this really dark period that took place from 1994 to 2017 under the somewhat notorious dictator Yahya Jammeh. And you can tell from the timing, basically Jammeh's reign ends in 2017, and a year later they've set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the intent of trying to establish a clear historical record of what happened, take statements from the public, investigate who are the perpetrators, what took place, and really shed light on not just what unfolded, but really, the Gambia is a country of just less than 3 million people, but really have the community participate and buy into this process of truth and reconciliation. And so we get there, myself and my fellow expert, Halo Maguire, in late 2018, and the commission has just been set up. And so our role is really to work with local Gambians who are working at the TRRC and help advise them as they're setting up these processes. So how do you take statements? How do you make this process effective and go out, send individual statement takers out across the country? And how do they want to do that? What are the sensitivities? How are they going to put things together at the end? How do you obtain informed consent? How do you collect evidence? Where do you store it? How do you put things together at the end, once you've collected all these materials? When we're talking about investigators, how do you investigate cases like this? How do you ensure that you're protecting your witnesses? How do you make sure that you're treating accusations, allegations, evidence of sexual assault with the sensitivity that you require? But how do you make sure that you're focusing on that area and, making sure that you're dealing effectively with a really sensitive subject? Just area after area, we were really taking our cue from the new employees who are working with the TRRC and seeing how can we bring some international expertise, some perspective from having seen these types of issues unfold across many different jurisdictions, many different contexts, and how can we help, give them some advice and guidance while really deferring to them in terms of how they want to proceed and the perspective that they're bringing as locals to that process.
Elliot, you went back a year after this for a follow-up mission. How was it when you went back there? Were you pleased with what you witnessed on the ground? Were the teams you trained still relying on the investigative methods that you trained them on, for instance?
The second mission we had to the Gambia, I would say confidently, is one of the best experiences I've had from a personal perspective in my career. To see the difference between where the TRRC was as it was just getting set up and then to see what it had already become so quickly. I mean, we know international justice processes move slowly, but the Gambian TRRC moved very quickly, and statement takers were now moving around the country, taking statements from all different communities. Investigators were out there interviewing people, building reports, finding some really compelling evidence and information about a range of atrocities that had taken place, identifying perpetrators, getting people to open up about what had taken place. And of course, at the same time, these public hearings are unfolding and the country is transforming as they're realizing collectively what took place. They're understanding, they certainly understood that atrocities had taken place. But when you live under a dictatorship like that, information does not flow freely. And just realizing things like the role that Yahya Jammeh, who was in charge, had over this paramilitary, the junglers, and how directly he was actually orchestrating some of these killings and tortures and just the extent of some of the crimes that were being committed.
Within 2 years, and I want to quote from what the Gambia is saying, not necessarily Emmanuel Diouf. This is what the report. This is prepared by the government.
lii nguur gi ñoo ko bind.
He said, ours
wax nañ ne ñun
was a country where fear ruled
nekkoon nañ réew boo xam ne ni nag nguur goo xam ne li ko séetoo moo rek ak njàqare lañ.
for over 2 decades.
lu dem nag si lu weesu ñaar fukki at.
Where families dreaded that midnight knock on their doors.
ci foo xam ne nii am nañ ay njaboot yoo xam ne nii xaaji guddi lañ leen ay koŋ-koŋ.
which took away their sons and husbands forever.
dal di jël seeni doom ak seeni jëkkër ba faw.
Where civil servants went to work every morning saying goodbye to their families as if it was the last time that they would ever come back home.
foo xam ne nii lii ñiy liggéey ci nguur gi léegoo-léeg bu ñuy xëy di liggéey dañuy dal di saafuwanteeg seen njaboot ne leen bàyyi ne comme maanaam ne daal dootuñ gisanteeg ñoom.
Where torture was widespread and routine.
foo xam ne nii ticcatu di méttital doomu aadama nekkoon na loo xam ne nii jikko la woon rek lu sax la woon.
Where unarmed and defenseless school children were gunned down in broad daylight with impunity.
foo xam ne ni nag ay taalibe yoo xam ne amuñ ngànnaay amuñ dara luy lore dañ leen fetel rey leen ci digg bëccëg.
When we return on the second mission, we're seeing all that, and then we're circling back and we're working with statement takers to tackle what challenges are they seeing? What's not working? What's working well that they should double down on? With the investigators, we're looking at statements they've taken and have the opportunity to work collectively with them to say, okay, what are we missing here? Or let's look at this statement and, you have some compelling evidence here, but is it clear what is the vantage point of this witness? What did they see versus, what someone else may have seen? And have we delineated that well enough? And what will this look like at the end? I have a prosecutorial background, so if you hand this over to a prosecutor, the following year or 2 years, 3 years from now, and they go to build a case, what more do they need? So it was a really exciting transition to this different secondary stage of the commission.
Elliot, I'd like to ask you now how it was for a former Canadian prosecutor to work in the Gambia. Of course, you come there with a really Western approach of what a transitional justice process should look like. One that may be drastically different compared to the conception of justice that your counterparts had, no? How did you reconcile these two visions?
This is part of working in international criminal law and something that I'm certainly always mindful of. I mean, you come from a particular legal background with a particular perspective. You come with certain assumptions and understandings about the rule of law, about how the justice system works, about how, your local culture and perspective inform you. And so, that's certainly something I came into the Gambia with my eyes very open about. In one sense, the Gambia has a legal system that's built in large part on the British system. So as a Canadian, that's not vastly different. But there are a lot of significant differences between that legal system and the system that I grew up in as a lawyer. And more so than that, you really need to listen to and defer to the local understanding and expertise of what is expected from the legal system. How has it been working? I mean, look, this country was under this dictatorship from 1994, and their institutions had been hollowed out. Their justice system had been largely corrupted. And so you bring that perspective and you bring a deference to what you're hearing and how you work with the institution, so that, I feel like I'm bringing some expertise and some knowledge that's been developed from working across many different cultures and legal systems. But I'm really trying not to, I'm not dictating anything. I'm not saying, this is what you must do. I'm really trying to offer advice and perspective and work with people to meet them where they are.
Elliot, the Gambia's TJ process is now at another step. The TRRC finished its work, and we are now at the stage of implementing the recommendations from the Commission, notably the Special Accountability Mechanism. Could you give us an idea of certain aspects to look out for and potential pitfalls to avoid to ensure that we effectively move the needle on justice in the region?
This is a really critical phase for the Gambia, and I think for any country that finds itself at this moment where your truth and reconciliation process has concluded and you have to take the critical next steps. The first thing is that it's critical for them to move quickly. Justice dies by delay. The government can't let the political will that they have right now, that the country has, fade away. And in particular in the Gambia, the TRRC was set up very quickly. It moved really quickly. But they need to continue to move quickly and ensure that they take these steps and that this will and this moment doesn't fade away. The second point I would really emphasize is that symbolism is valuable. And I mean that. It really is valuable. But accountability matters. So memorials, apologies, commemorations, those are all important, but you need prosecutions and accountability of the key perpetrators so that the rest doesn't seem hollow. And that's consistent with the experience I had at the TRRC, but I think that's also borne out historically, internationally. This is particularly the case in the Gambia, where you have Yahya Jammeh himself is sitting in Equatorial Guinea and has thus far not been held accountable. And as recently as October, he's been making statements about the fact that he might return to the Gambia. So accountability is critical. The third thing I would highlight is that institutions matter. I think we often underrate globally, we underrate the importance of our institutions, and we really need to see across the Gambia that they reform institutions that had been corrupted and that had been part of perpetrating these atrocities, and that they build and strengthen their institutions generally. The final point I would say is that they just really need to protect and fund these follow-up initiatives and press forward. That means that they need funding, they need international backing and support. They need to do everything that they can to press ahead at this critical moment now that the TRRC is complete and make sure they don't lose that momentum.
Elliot, in the context of the Gambia, this Truth Commission was quite critical in actually moving the needle on justice in the Gambia. But could you maybe compare with other contexts where such a Truth Commission might not be applicable, for instance?
So there is no one size fits all for international justice. And we often talk about the spectrum of options that you may look at. That can be in domestic prosecutions, it can be international prosecutions held at international organizations, and it can be Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you look at a situation like what happened to the Yazidis in northern Iraq, where bands of ISIS fighters are committing horrific killings and enslaving women, and how do you hold them accountable? What was one of the things we spent quite a bit of time on when I was on mission in Iraq, and there was I certainly had a strong sense there, listening to people, that at TRRC, people weren't looking to understand and reconcile with their perpetrators. They wanted them held accountable, and they wanted not just the people at the top, but the individual perpetrators who were committing these horrible atrocities. They wanted them prosecuted. In the context of Iraq, and this is another thing we spent quite a bit of time talking about, there are a lot of other crimes and other contexts that are unfolding. There's what's happened to the Yazidis, but there's interethnic violence across the country. And there was a lot of resistance from other sectors of Iraqi society to focus just on what happened to the Yazidis. And that's certainly it's no excuse for inaction, but I think what seemed most pressing to me from those meetings was really to make sure that we had first, unearthed and identified all of the evidence in relation to individual perpetrators, and then enabled the prosecutions, whether it was part of some broader commission that could focus on those prosecutions, or a hybrid court or an international court, or whether it was part of domestic prosecutions in different countries where those ISIS fighters had relocated. So, there may be a time when a truth and reconciliation approach could be effective in a country like Iraq, but it would take a lot of time and I think work to understand, what would be a meaningful way to do that, and how could everyone ensure that this wouldn't be an exercise that was hollow or felt premature, when in fact what was needed most pressingly was accountability.
Elliot, thank you for being with us. It was a real pleasure to have you.
It's been great to be here. Thanks so much.
And special thanks to our listeners. This was our third episode of a series of conversation with Justice Rapid Response experts, discussing current challenges in the sector of justice and accountability, and identifying solutions to help victims and survivors seek justice. In our next episode, we will go back to Ukraine this time to discuss the importance of relying on child rights expertise in investigative processes. Thank you. This episode was made possible thanks to the support of Global Affairs Canada. The Justice Decoder podcast is a Justice Rapid Response project, directed and edited by Cesar Rojas Angel, hosted by me, Olivier Clavet. Audio post-production by Eloisa Arcila at Sinsonte Studio.